Hey guys, tonight we tumble gently into the half-misted past of ancient Greece, where myths mingle with municipal zoning disputes, and the gods can't agree on whose gift is more useful, an eternal spring or a really solid salad dressing. Picture yourself on a warm stone path in the early morning, the Aegean Sea glinting softly behind you, a coastal town humming to life, and you, yes you, are trying to help name the place before the gods start fighting again. This isn't the part of mythology where monsters roam or tragic heroes cry into the ocean. No, this is the slow, civic kind of story. Urban planning, God style. You'll be just fine. Probably. But you will have to sit through some divine passive-aggressiveness, a touch of public voting, and more olive references than any sleepy mortal should be expected to track. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, tell me where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is as you press play. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge uphill in your sandals, the limestone warm even in dawn's hush, toward a hilltop that doesn't have a name yet, but soon will. Around you, other townsfolk shuffle, murmuring sleepy greetings, olive baskets slung over shoulders, brows furrowed in confusion. There's been a summons. No one's quite sure why. But the rumor is that the gods have finally taken an interest in this bright little peninsula that juts confidently out from the coast. The town, such as it is, has everything a respectable ancient Greek settlement needs: a marketplace, a temple or two, decent fish, and gossip thicker than barley stew. But it's missing a name. And as anyone with a divine complex will tell you, names are serious business. You pass a weathered woman who sells garlands for head wreaths. She looks at you and mutters, "They're coming today. The sea one and the wise one." You blink. Oh no. See, back in these days, when gods wanted something, they didn't write polite letters or send messengers. They appeared. Big. Shiny. Loud. Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, and let's face it, dramatics, has been eyeing this patch of land for a while. But so has Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and highly specific plant gifts. And so, in the air today, there's more than dust. There's a tension that smells like salt and olives, thunder and scroll ink. No one says it, but everyone knows, the gods are going to compete. Historians still argue whether this contest really represents a divine land dispute or if it's more metaphorical, a clash between maritime supremacy and agricultural wisdom. Either way, something big's about to happen. The sun lifts higher, washing the rocky Acropolis in gold. There's a stillness to the crowd now, people pausing mid-step, mouths open like a breath has been held too long. Then, with a rumble like distant surf, Poseidon arrives. Not walks up politely. Arrives. Trident in hand, beard windswept, eyes like crashing waves. The air thickens, the sea below leaps, and you swear the ground tilts slightly beneath your feet. He strides forward and slams his trident down on the stone. Crack. From the split in the rock, water gushes upward, except it isn't fresh. It's salt water. A whole spring of it. The crowd leans in, puzzled. Poseidon, chest puffed, grins like someone who just gift-wrapped an entire ocean. "You're welcome," he seems to say. You cup a little of the spring in your hand. It's cold. Briny. Smells like sardines. Not exactly refreshing. Some murmur approval. Salt means sea means trade, but others frown. After all, you already have a sea, down the hill. Poseidon scowls at the mixed reaction, eyes flicking to the sky. Because he knows who's next. A breeze picks up, not aggressive like Poseidon's storm gusts, but measured. Crisp. There's a shimmer, a shifting of the air as though the world just inhaled more carefully. And then she's there. Athena. No thunder, no crashing waves, just a stillness, a brightness in her eyes that pins every gaze. She's not in armor today. Instead, she wears a saffron himation, the folds tucked with mathematical precision, her hair bound with a band of silver threads. And in her hands, nothing. She steps toward the trident-cracked earth and pauses. Then, with a simple gesture, as quiet as falling leaves, she touches the ground. From that touch, a tree rises. Not huge. Not dramatic. Just tall enough. Its leaves shimmer silver green in the light. Its bark twists with purpose. An olive tree. Now here's a funny thing. Olive trees aren't flashy. They don't sprout like wildfire or glitter like sunlit waves. But they live long, some for centuries, and their fruit, useful, edible, praisable, profitable, sacred. You reach out. The leaves are soft underneath, the bark warm, and suddenly Poseidon's splashy gift seems less inspired. Still, opinions are divided. Some love the sea's promise, others lean toward Athena's fruit-bearing shade. You scratch your chin and try to look wise, as murmurs rise around you. The gods have made their pitches. Now comes the impossible part. Choosing. And so, with all the calm of a broken amphora shop, the crowd prepares for the next step, the judging. Because if there's one thing gods love more than applause, it's validation. Preferably from mortals. No pressure, right? You stand there on the stone-strewn hilltop, staring at a gushing saltwater spring on one side and a gently rustling olive tree on the other, and for a moment you think, maybe no one will actually ask the people. Maybe the gods will just sort it out with a thunderbolt duel or a philosophical debate with really big hand gestures. But no. That would be far too straightforward. Instead, a priest steps forward, robe flapping slightly in the breeze, beard tangled like he's been chewing on the end of it from stress, and announces that the citizens of the town will vote. Yes, you included. Democracy, baby. Even when it might get you smote. The rules are simple. Men vote, sorry, everyone else. One per household, and no gods allowed to hover ominously while people make their choice. There are murmurs, side glances, and a few, "I told you Athena was the better choice," whispers floating through the crowd. You don't say anything. You're too busy trying not to make eye contact with Poseidon, who is now sulking near the fountain and muttering about harpoons. The voting method is laughably lo-fi, small stones, black or white, dropped into urns marked with a god's name. And it's all so quiet. You hear the clink of each pebble like a heartbeat. Meanwhile, Athena just watches. No speeches. No eye-rolling. She simply stands beside her tree with the poise of someone who knows that, over centuries, wisdom has better odds than waves. Historians still argue whether this olive versus ocean contest ever happened in such an organized way, or if it was a myth retrofitted to justify why the city honored Athena over other gods. But whether you believe the specifics or not, one thing is clear: Athena wins. Barely. And how do we know? Because that olive tree still stands. Okay, maybe not that tree. But on the same rock, in the same grove on the Acropolis of Athens, a sacred olive tree grew, and still grows, replanted over and over again, a green testament to one of mythology's most bureaucratic squabbles. You watch as the final vote is counted. Athena's urn is heavier by a handful of stones. Poseidon lets out a theatrical sigh, raises a wave off the coast that soaks a fishmonger's stall, and storms off in a literal thundercloud. He'll get over it. Maybe. Athena, for her part, just gives a small, knowing nod. She doesn't need applause. The people have chosen, and their choice is olive. Which, sounds less impressive than it should. Here's your city, now. And it has a name: Athens. Not Poseidonia, or Wave Town, or Moistopolis. Just Athens. Because of a tree. Because of what it stood for: stability, resourcefulness, peace, oil you could cook with and rub into sore warrior muscles. You wander back down the hill, trying not to giggle at how earnestly practical it all feels. Like if gods had to apply for planning permission, Athena brought the paperwork and Poseidon brought a glitter cannon. But don't be fooled by the calm. This tree has seen things. Take, for instance, how seriously Athenians treated it. It wasn't just a symbol, it was sacred. Protected by law. If you damaged one of these Moria, as the city's sacred olives were called, it was an actual crime. Like jail time serious. Some scholars suggest that if a landowner failed to care properly for one on their estate, the tree could be seized by the city. And you thought your landlord was strict. You pass a courtyard where a group of children are being taught how to press olives, stone grinders, woven baskets, dark green fruit glistening in the sun. One girl tosses you a sample and says, "Not just for eating, Keeps armor from rusting." She's right. Olive oil was used for more than food. It lit lamps, oiled weapons, bathed bodies. It was, in many ways, the lifeblood of the city. You could even win it. Olympic victors were sometimes awarded amphorae filled with oil from these sacred trees. Imagine training your whole life, defeating your opponents, and going home with, essentially, a gift basket. A very prestigious gift basket, but still. As the day wears on, the city shifts. Builders mark spots for new altars. Merchants draft olive-based slogans. You hear someone mutter, "Athens, where the trees are sacred and the oil is pure." And you, caught in the slow hum of a city deciding its identity, realize something. This wasn't really about the gifts. It was about what kind of city Athens wanted to be. Poseidon offered power, travel, trade, even danger. Athena offered growth, patience, intellect, peace. And while the sea never really leaves you alone, it still laps and crashes at the edges of this rocky land. It's the tree that has rooted itself into the city's story. Quirky side note. That sacred olive tree on the Acropolis was said to regenerate itself. Legend claims that after the Persians burned the city during their invasion, the tree burned too, but new shoots appeared within days. A miracle. A good PR campaign. Either way, it's one of the earliest examples of "we bounce back" mythology. Historians love to argue whether this tale was propaganda to boost morale after the invasion, or if some especially determined gardener made it happen with wet cloths and whispered encouragement. You yawn a little as the warm light spills over the temple columns. Around you, the city that started as a hill with a spring and a sapling is becoming something more. And all because someone asked, which of these is the better gift? Salt water that rots your sandals? Or oil that heals your bruises? Easy choice, right? Unless you really like fish. You wake slowly to the sound of shouting, not war cries or panicked alarms, but the highly specific kind of bureaucratic shouting that only ancient city councils can achieve. You're in a shady courtyard now, half in dream, half draped across a cushion that smells like rosemary and dust, and the conversation drifting your way has one unmistakable theme: land. More specifically, whose land? And whether a certain sacred olive tree technically counts as city property or falls under the jurisdiction of the temple, or maybe, just maybe, belongs to a local nobleman whose family claims ancestral pruning rights. That's right. We've reached the real estate portion of the myth. See, after Athena's victory and the founding of Athens, her olive tree didn't just sit around being admired like a piece of civic sculpture. It grew. And so did the number of people who wanted to own a piece of it, or, more accurately, the land around it. You sit up a little straighter. One man, wearing a tunic stained with ochre and law scrolls under his arm, insists the tree falls within a public, sacred precinct, and therefore any fruit it produces belongs to the goddess. Another, whose robes are cleaner but whose voice carries the weight of generational entitlement, argues that the tree originally grew on his family's estate, long before the Acropolis was anything more than a goat shed with ambition. And this is where it gets messy. Athenians weren't just proud of their olive trees, they were legally obsessive about them. The trees had records, inventories, ritual inspections. If a moria was damaged, scribes wrote it down. If one was removed, there had better be paperwork. Historians still argue whether these trees were truly sacred in the divine sense, or if they were simply so economically vital that the city wrapped them in religious red tape for protection. Either way, you didn't mess with them. And yet, people did. You drift closer to the edge of the square, where a young apprentice is copying records into a wax tablet. He looks up and offers, conspiratorially, they're fighting over who gets the oil. Again. Apparently, this happens every year. According to surviving inscriptions, yes, real ones, landowners with sacred trees had to give part of their oil harvest to the state. But determining which trees were sacred, and which were just, well, tree-ish, that's where disputes flared like summer wildfires. In one infamous case, a man was accused of uprooting several sacred olives on his property. Not because he hated nature, but because he wanted to build something more profitable, likely a house with a better sea view. He claimed ignorance. The city claimed sacrilege. The punishment? If guilty, he faced exile, confiscation of property, maybe even death. For hurting a tree. You look up at the branches above, their dark leaves shifting in the breeze. They don't seem vengeful. Just patient. Like they've seen it all before and will outlive every courtroom squabble. Nearby, a philosopher, sandals undone, eyes clouded with too many late nights, leans against a column and mutters to no one in particular, if the tree is sacred, then is the ground it stands on sacred? And if the ground is sacred, do we not all stand upon it? Are we all, therefore, fruit of Athena? It's unclear whether anyone's listening, but it sounds profound enough to earn him dinner somewhere. Now, here's a quirky little side route. Some ancient Athenians believed the original olive tree of Athena was protected by serpents. Not metaphorical ones, actual sacred snakes. Temple guardians, fed honeycakes and kept happy, presumably to keep intruders and axe-happy landowners at bay. Scholars debate whether these snakes were symbolic protectors or actual worshipped creatures. Either way, it added some toothy gravitas to the tree's mystique. Imagine trying to steal a branch and being hissed at by Athena's personal security system. Not exactly ideal. As the afternoon heat thickens, the council slowly dissolves into a collection of grumbles, nods, and vague promises to reconvene next festival. A young priest walks past, muttering, "We need a clearer policy," while a landowner whispers to his aide about hiring a surveyor who's seen the sacred boundary lines differently. And that, dear listener, is where myth meets municipal headache. Because when a divine gift becomes a daily asset, something useful, profitable, tied to labor and legacy, it stops being just a miracle and starts becoming a mortgage concern. You lie back again, arms behind your head, watching a few olive petals drift past in the breeze. Somewhere in the distance, a woman sings a lullaby about trees with roots in the heavens and branches that cradle dreams. You wonder if she even knows it's about Athena's tree, or if it's just what her grandmother used to hum on hot days like this. And here's the twist: olive trees live a long time. Like hundreds of years. Some say thousands. Which means disputes over them don't fade, they get inherited. Passed down, like family heirlooms or grudges. So maybe, just maybe, the tree still standing on the Acropolis today is part of the original. Or maybe it's the fourth or fifth generation, each one quietly absorbing centuries of philosophical ramblings and passive-aggressive land deeds. Either way, you get it now. The tree wasn't just Athena's gift to win a contest. It was a permanent guest in the middle of everyone's lives, growing silently while people argued about it, beneath it, for it. And still, it stays. Now the cicadas buzz like background static, and the olive branches above rustle with that soft, whispery click that only happens when leaves rub together like gossiping grandmothers. You're still lying beneath the tree, but the scene has changed. Time has tilted, just slightly, and now you're no longer in the thick of political squabbles. You're in the hush of ritual. It's early morning, still violet with dew, and the priests have come. They move with that practiced slowness of people who understand that gods don't respond well to rushing. Robes of indigo and saffron flutter in the breeze. One carries a bronze pitcher, another a small bundle of wool, pure, white, freshly shorn. You sit up carefully, knowing instinctively not to disturb what's happening. This isn't a show. It's not even a proper festival. It's one of those quiet devotional acts people do when no one's looking, perhaps for Athena's favor, or maybe just to keep their crops from dying in protest. Today, the tree gets an offering. You watch as the priestess, middle-aged, eyes sharp despite the early hour, kneels and pours a stream of oil around the base of the trunk. Olive oil, of course. The irony is not lost on anyone, even in ancient times. Offering olives to the olive tree might seem like bringing sand to a beach, but in religious logic, it's fitting. You give the tree its own gifts back. A reminder that you're grateful. The priest mutters a hymn, barely audible, and dabs the trunk with the wool. It's a kind of symbolic cleansing. Rituals in ancient Greece weren't just big parades. They were often intimate and repetitive, like bedtime routines for gods. You breathe in deep, catching the smell, rich, sharp, almost nutty from the oil. And here comes today's little historical gem. Some Athenians believed olive trees could hear offerings. Not metaphorically, literally hear. Which meant rituals had to be spoken clearly, reverently, as if the tree itself were listening and judging. There's something oddly comforting in that thought. Like the trees keeping tabs for the goddess. One boy, perhaps 12, stands a little apart. He holds a clay bowl with a crust of bread in it. Not much of an offering, really. But he presses it to his chest with both hands like it's the most precious thing in the world. You suspect this is a personal prayer. Not for the city. Not even for his family. Maybe for a sick dog. Maybe for his own fear of growing up. Whatever it is, He lays the bowl beside the trunk with the seriousness of a diplomat and whispers something you can't hear. That's the thing about religion in Athens. It wasn't always thunderbolts and grand myths. Sometimes it was just this, a boy and a tree and a moment. Historians still argue whether these daily, small rituals mattered more to the average Athenian than the grand state festivals. It's easy to focus on the big events, Panathenea processions with jugglers and torch races, but those happened once a year. Quiet prayers beneath trees happened daily. They're harder to document but likely more influential. You stretch your legs, careful not to knock over any ceremonial items, and begin wandering toward the edge of the temple grove. The sun is higher now, and a pair of old women pass by muttering about how things used to be. One gestures vaguely at the Acropolis and says, "When I was a girl, we left real honey cakes, not these stale market things." There's always a golden age. And it's always in the past. As you stroll, you pass a small plaque nailed into a stone. It marks the sacred Moria trees. It warns, somewhat ominously, that removing branches is a crime against the city and Athena herself. But scratched lightly beneath the official warning, in tiny graffiti, someone has carved, "But what if the tree forgives you?" It makes you grin. Even in the most sacred spaces, Athenians had a sense of humor. Or perhaps guilt. A curly-haired girl, trailing behind her older sister, crouches and picks up a fallen olive. She turns it over in her hands as if expecting it to whisper a secret. Then she tucks it into the hem of her tunic and runs off. A small theft. But harmless. You doubt Athena would mind. Now here's something fun. There were stories, fringe ones, not part of the mainstream myths, about people who tried to clone Athena's tree. Not in a scientific way, of course, but through grafting. Planting cuttings in secret groves, hoping to raise daughter trees that carried the same divine spark. Most failed. Some claimed success. A few swore those trees bore silver-green fruit that shimmered under moonlight. Spoiler alert, historians don't buy the glowing fruit part. But the impulse, that longing to preserve something sacred and bend it toward personal use, that's very real. You circle back to the tree as the priests are packing up. The wool is left behind, tucked into the crook of two branches, fluttering gently like a forgotten handkerchief. And the tree stands still, indifferent and eternal. A breeze picks up. It smells like beeswax and sun-warmed leaves. And you wonder, if Athena were to visit now, in this quiet moment, would she even say anything? Or would she just nod, perhaps stroke the bark, and smile at how long her gift has lasted? You sit once more, hands resting on sun-baked stone, and feel the weight of time stretching in all directions. The rituals have ended for the day. But the story, as always, goes on. The wind shifts again, cooler this time, and you draw your cloak a little tighter, not out of cold, really, but because the air suddenly carries a trace of tension. Like you've stepped out of a dream and into something closer to courtroom drama. You're still in Athens, yes. Still near the tree. But now the setting feels busier, louder. You're in the heart of the Areopagus, the hill of Ares, where the sharpest tongues in the city come to argue, accuse, and occasionally ruin reputations over lunch. And today's case? Oh, it's juicy. Who actually owns the land where Athena's olive tree stands? You'd think the answer is simple. The goddess, obviously. But if you've spent any time in ancient Greece, or, modern real estate, you know nothing involving land is ever that clean. The problem starts like this. The tree, the very first olive tree according to myth, sits smack dab on prime real estate at the heart of Athens, within the Acropolis. And the Acropolis, while sacred, is also surrounded by neighborhoods, temples, and a rotating cast of aristocratic families who've each claimed, at one point or another, that they were the original stewards of the goddess's grove. Cue the legal gymnastics. Today, you're watching two such families present their cases. Both boast names that roll off the tongue like marble rolling downhill, the Aetioboutadae and the Alcmeonidae. Ancient noble lines with more drama than a modern soap opera. And both insist that their ancestors were personally appointed by Athena to protect the tree, manage the rituals, and yes, collect a tidy offering from the city for their troubles. You find yourself beside a scribe, furiously chiseling into a wax tablet. He whispers, "They've been arguing this since Solon's reforms. And probably before." You nod politely, but your brain is still catching up. Solon, there's our historical fact drop, was one of Athens' great lawgivers in the early 6th century BCE. He laid down reforms meant to cool feuding aristocrats and give the common folk a bit more say. He also tried to clarify who held what land. But let's be honest, he mostly just kicked the olive tree dispute down the road. Today, the argument has flared again, and it's getting heated. One man, red-faced and flapping his cloak like an angry rooster, accuses the opposing family of tampering with sacred soil. The other responds by quoting a line from Hesiod, something about honest plowmen and divine judgment, and you can practically hear the eye roll from the crowd. The thing is, owning a piece of sacred land isn't just about land. It's about power, prestige, legacy. If you can say your ancestors touched the bark of Athena's original tree, you get invited to the right feasts. Your sons are more likely to be elected. Your cousins get better seats at the theater. It's all connected. Historians still argue whether these families genuinely believed their claims or simply knew how to work the myth for political gain. But here's the fringe tidbit for today. One fragment from a now-lost Athenian play hints that someone once tried to chop down the tree, either to prove it wasn't divine or as revenge for losing a land dispute. The tree allegedly bled, and the would-be lumberjack went mad, or blind, or turned into an owl, depending on who you ask. You lean in, watching the debate twist on itself. Someone brings up the oracles. Of course. When logic fails, invoke prophecy. One side insists that a Delphic oracle once confirmed their sacred stewardship. The other side counters with a different oracle, from Dodona, scribbled on a scrap of lead that conveniently burned in a mysterious fire. It's all deeply dramatic. And also very, very Greek. Eventually, a magistrate raises his hand, signaling the end of testimony. No decisions today, just enough fuel for a dozen more whispered arguments in wine shops tonight. As the crowd disperses, a young woman leans against a column near you. She looks amused. They never really want to solve it, she says, eyes on the empty debate podium. The tree is just a stage. It's the story they want. And wow, does that ring true? Because whether it's Athena's actual gift, or just a very old tree with excellent PR, the olive tree on the Acropolis isn't going anywhere. It survives lawsuits, wildfires, and existential crises. At one point, the Persians even burned the whole Acropolis down, and yet, according to legend, the tree sprouts new shoots the very next day. Miracle or marketing? Up to you. You wander away from the debate site, letting the tension fade. Down one narrow alley, you find a row of olive oil merchants. Their amphorae are stamped with Athena's symbol, of course, proof that the branding never really stopped. One merchant offers you a taste, pungent, grassy, a little bitter at the back of the tongue. He winks and says, pressed from the goddess's own fruit. You don't ask for a receipt. Back near the base of the Acropolis, a group of children plays a game that involves balancing olive pits on their noses while chanting a rhyme about Poseidon's bad aim. You smile. Even the kids are part of the myth-making machine. You sit again under the tree, yes, that tree, and feel the warmth of the stone seep into your skin. Above, the leaves glitter gold and green, shifting in the wind like 1,000 tiny prayers. The lawsuits will come and go. So will the families. But the tree just waits. You're still beneath the shimmering olive leaves, their whisper soft against the late afternoon hush. But the mood's changing again, less courtroom drama, more ghost story. You blink, and the shadows stretch longer. The tree feels older now. Not just ancient, but aware, like it's seen things you're not supposed to know yet. Because now, you're following the tree's roots, not literally, unless you brought a shovel, which weird, but through the deep vein of rituals, offerings, and little superstitions that Athenians developed around it. If the tree was a gift from a goddess, well, you better keep it happy. You stroll through the remains of an ancient sanctuary just a few paces from the tree. This place once echoed with soft footsteps and whispered prayers, mostly from women. You spot faint grooves in the marble where oil offerings were poured, a ring of blackened stone where incense curled skyward, maybe all the way to Olympus. One column is etched with symbols, owls, laurel, a single olive branch drawn so delicately you can imagine someone carving it with trembling hands. You notice a priestess in a simple saffron robe tending a low clay brazier. Her fingers smear crushed olive leaves into a paste, murmuring something rhythmic under her breath. Nearby, a girl, maybe 12, is tying a thread around her wrist and then wrapping it around the base of the tree. A charm for good dreams? Or maybe for fertility? Historians still argue whether these small rituals were purely devotional or if they doubled as quiet pleas for personal blessings, disguised as civic piety. You linger at the edge of the ritual zone, careful not to disturb anything. One wrong footstep and a seer might read your accident as an omen. The priestess doesn't seem to notice you, or maybe you're not worth noticing without an offering. That's fine. You're more here to observe. Besides, you left your bottle of extra virgin at home. A boy in a rust-colored tunic approaches the tree next, carrying a shallow wicker basket. Inside are little tokens, clay figurines, bits of wool, a small cake shaped like a turtle. He places them one by one in a niche beside the roots, whispering something between apology and wish. You wonder what he's asking for. Safety. A passing grade on his oratory test? For his dad to stop yelling about the Spartans? These aren't grand rituals. No thunderbolts, no blood sacrifices. Just gentle, repetitive acts. Clean the altar, feed the flame, tie the string. It's like spiritual maintenance. And honestly, there's something comforting about that. The idea that the gods don't need spectacle, just consistency. You pass a stone bench, worn smooth, probably from centuries of olive oil-slicked philosophers lounging and arguing about whether gods even care. Plato might have sat here. Or maybe his barber. Both probably had equally strong opinions. Further along, someone scratched a crude drawing into a wall, a stick figure tree and a figure labeled, "Me," arms raised dramatically. Underneath, in even shakier script, the word, "Thanks." It's not official, it's not sanctioned, but it might be the most sincere thing you've seen all day. That's the thing about this tree. It wasn't just a symbol. It was personal. One quirkier bit. Some Athenians believed that if you slept under the olive tree, just once, you'd either have prophetic dreams or wake up with your hair turned silver. Depends on who you ask. Some folks even claimed to hear the tree whisper if the wind hit it just right. Most people chalked that up to imagination or too much wine. But still, they kept listening. And maybe that's where the real ritual lives, not just in formal offerings but in everyday habits. The old man who greets the tree each morning with a bow. The baker who pinches off a bit of dough and buries it beneath the roots. The mother who teaches her daughter not just to tie the charm but how to mean it. You step back from the sacred space and head downhill, toward the edge of the city. The landscape shifts, fewer marble colonnades, more dusty footpaths and low mud brick homes. But even here, outside the holy circle, olive trees rule the world. In a courtyard, a family is pressing olives. You watch them feed them into a wooden screw press, the stone weights lowering slowly like a patient argument. The oil drips into a wide ceramic basin, catching the sun in ripples of liquid gold. A boy darts past you holding a jar as big as his head. He grins, but there's a streak of oil on his cheek like war paint. In the corner, a woman hangs sprigs of dried olive leaves in her doorway. Protection from illness, she tells you. Or maybe just superstition. Historians still argue whether this practice came from official temple rites or from something older, rural magic, perhaps predating Athens itself. Back at the tree, you notice something. It's dusk now, and the last light catches a small iron pin driven into the earth, nearly invisible. Probably left from an older ritual, long since forgotten. Or maybe planted recently by someone who still believes, even if they won't admit it out loud. You sit again beneath the branches. The city murmurs all around you, philosophers, merchants, temple-goers, gossipers. You feel like you've heard them all. But above it, always, is that rustling hush from the tree. A breath. A reminder. A presence. Athena's olive might be myth, but the faith people built around it? That's very, very real. And for just a moment, you could almost believe you're part of the ritual too. You stay under the tree just long enough for the stars to start appearing. Bright, ancient dots scattered across the same sky that every Athenian, priestess or farmer, once tilted their head to see. The Acropolis behind you is falling silent, stones cooling in the night air, but your journey's not over yet. Because if Athena's gift brought blessings, it also brought paperwork. That's right, it's time to dive into the gloriously unglamorous side of mythology, land disputes, inheritance squabbles, and the bureaucratic aftershocks of divine intervention. So, what happens when a goddess gifts you something valuable? Not just spiritually, but, economically. Olive oil in ancient Athens wasn't just a nice side dish. It powered lamps, moisturized dry elbows, seasoned fish, and oiled up athletes so shiny they looked like greased statues mid-wrestle. Entire livelihoods depended on olives. And the tree on the Acropolis? It wasn't just sacred, it was state-owned real estate. You imagine an early city official, maybe in a faded indigo chiton, rolling his eyes as someone storms in, demanding clarification. Is my grove technically an extension of Athena's grove if the roots cross the boundary wall? Because yes, disputes happened. They always do. Ancient land records, some on stone, some on pottery shards, include boundary disagreements that went to city magistrates. Families fought over which trees counted as ancestral and which were public property. One particularly sticky case involved a merchant claiming his grandfather's tree had grown from a seed taken from Athena's original tree. Was that tree sacred? Was it taxable? Was he allowed to prune it without divine retribution? Historians still argue whether Athens ever formalized ownership of religious trees or if the boundaries were fuzzy on purpose to allow both reverence and regulation. Because let's be honest, if a sacred tree dies in your courtyard, are you mourning or sweating your next tax audit? Wander now through the quiet backstreets of ancient Athens, past olive presses, ceramic workshops, and modest family homes with gnarled trees at their gates. Each one tells a little part of this dispute. You spot a pair of brothers arguing gently over a patch of soil. One gestures to a scrawled map, the other to the tree behind their house. Their grandmother watches from a doorway, arms folded. You suspect she remembers planting that tree herself, long before maps. There's a deep cultural tension here between private life and public faith. If Athena's tree is everyone's, then how do you keep a piece for yourself? Some families tried naming their groves after the goddess to ward off challengers, Athena's third cousin's orchard, essentially. Others claimed dreams or omens justified their harvests. The bureaucrats, of course, had their own olive-based headaches. State scribes tracked tree counts, harvest outputs, and trade routes. Olive oil was exported in sturdy ceramic amphorae stamped with city emblems. They were so important, archaeologists now use them to trace Athenian influence across the Mediterranean. Picture a customs agent in Ephesus flipping over an oil jug and sighing, "Another one from Athens, huh?" Figures. But the land arguments weren't just local. They stretched into colonies and conquered territories. Athenian settlers brought olive cuttings with them, like diplomats with roots. Sometimes literally. They planted groves in Sicily, in Libya, in southern Italy. Some of those trees still stand. You pass one now in your mind's eye, gnarled and half-buried in volcanic soil. A shepherd naps beneath it, oblivious. His dog twitches in a dream, probably chasing something that looks suspiciously like a tax collector. But it wasn't all small claims and olive accounting. Remember that tree you saw growing in the sacred precinct? That same one appears in property documents centuries later. Roman writers mention it, still standing, still guarded. They also note that the land around it had been parceled, debated, and relitigated countless times. You can almost hear the weary clerk muttering, "You'd think a tree from a goddess would settle things, not make it worse." There's even a whispered tale, a fringe tidbit, if you will, about an Athenian noble who tried to bribe a local priest to declare his tree the true descendant of Athena's. The priest refused. The noble, not to be discouraged, paid an actor to deliver a fake oracle in the marketplace. It backfired. He ended up fined for impersonating a god, which is, incidentally, still illegal in several parts of Greece. All of this, the legal squabbles, the sacred loopholes, the whispered bribery, is wrapped around one deeper truth. When myth becomes property, it stops being just a story. It becomes precedent. Something you can cite in a dispute. Something that sits uncomfortably at the intersection of reverence and zoning law. And you can feel that discomfort, can't you? It's in the way the roots of Athena's tree curl under the marble, reaching into both temple grounds and city records. It's the way olive branches appear in both poems and grain inventories. It's the simple fact that, at some point, someone stood in a sun-drenched courtyard and said, "That's my goddess-given tree," and someone else replied, "Prove it." And just like that, the myth ripples into history. Not through miracles, but through municipal headaches. You smile a little. It's somehow comforting, this mess. Even gods, apparently, can't stop humans from arguing about property lines. You wander now through the sun-baked hills just outside the city walls, your sandals crunching over dusty paths that snake between low stone fences and rows of olive trees so ancient they seem half-carved from time itself. The light is golden, honey-thick, and clings to the branches like a blessing. You're here because, while Athena may have planted one sacred tree, the rest of Attica turned that gift into an empire of groves, and with it, an entire economy rooted in something that squishes. See, olive oil wasn't just a nice-to-have in ancient Athens. It was the city's liquid gold. Merchants built fortunes on it. Athletes were smeared in it. Babies were massaged with it. You could anoint your gods or your goat with it. No one would bat an eye. And all of that reverence began with Athena's tree, that very first taproot of cultural identity, economic strategy, and culinary superiority. Let's follow an amphora, shall we? Imagine you're in the Ceramicus district, where potters spin clay into those tall, double-handled jugs that store oil. The air smells like smoke, and the rhythmic thump of foot-powered wheels echoes like a heartbeat. You pass a kiln glowing with heat. Nearby, a boy stamps the base of each finished jar with an official seal, Athena's owl, wings tucked. Quality control, ancient style. That amphora gets filled at a state-supervised press, where olives are crushed under grooved stones turned by donkeys who look permanently unimpressed. The oil flows into clay basins, separating slowly. Thick golden liquid, slick as silk. It glows in the lamplight. You could fry squid in it or trade it for tin in far-off Cyprus. This isn't just olive oil, it's currency. Historians still argue whether olive production in Athens was truly a state-run monopoly or a patchwork of private farms taxed within an inch of their lives. What's clear is that the state took its olives seriously. So seriously, in fact, that it was illegal to cut down a healthy tree. Penalties ranged from stiff fines to exile, depending on whether the tree was public or sacred. There's a quirky tidbit here that always makes you smile. In some villages, olive trees were assigned tree guardians, essentially olive babysitters who monitored their growth, ensured their health, and reported suspicious activity. Yes, somewhere in the dusty archives of Athenian law, there's a record of someone tattling that their neighbor's tree looked emotionally neglected. Bureaucracy, but botanical. But back to our amphora. Once sealed, it gets loaded onto a ship at Piraeus, Athens's bustling port. You imagine a sailor muttering about breakage as the jars are nestled between crates of figs and pickled fish. The ship sets sail, bearing Athenian oil to eager markets, maybe Carthage, maybe Alexandria. There it's poured into bronze lamps, rubbed onto aching shoulders, or spooned into barley porridge by people who will never see Athena's tree but still owe it thanks. This trade wasn't small time. Athenian oil became a Mediterranean standard. Archaeologists find those same stamped amphorae everywhere, buried under Roman villas, sunken in shipwrecks, reused as burial urns. Some jars still carry faint traces of their original contents, dried oil clinging to clay after 2,000 years. Time may fade gods, but it apparently spares Greece. You pause beside a vineyard where olive trees stand like sentinels between rows of vines. A shepherd leans on a crook, watching his flock pick its way through fallen leaves. He nods to you, then spits into the dust. "Still better than barley," he mutters, pointing at his sheep. You nod solemnly. No one gets poetic about barley. And speaking of poetry, olives had their own category in verse. Homer called olive oil liquid gold. In the Odyssey, Odysseus builds his bed from an olive trunk, literally sleeping inside the symbol of Athena's favor. It's intimate, almost romantic, until you remember he also used it to soap himself up after slaughtering suitors. Mythology doesn't do subtle. But beyond the trade and tradition, olives meant home. A sign of roots. A symbol that you belong to the land, and that the land belonged to the gods. Farmers planted trees for their children, knowing they wouldn't bear fruit for years. Olive groves weren't just fields, they were inheritances in waiting. People proposed under those trees, swore oaths, fought over them, buried their dogs beneath them. You find yourself passing one such grove now, twilight settling in. Each tree seems alive, twisted with personality. One leans like it's whispering secrets. Another splits into 3 trunks, like it couldn't make up its mind. There's something almost human about them, Maybe it's the way they bear weight for decades, quietly, without fanfare. There's a saying from the era, "A man plants an olive tree not for himself, but for his grandson." You like that? You like how it ties back to Athena, whose gift wasn't flashy or quick. It was slow, steady, dependable. It required faith and patience. Just like the best stories. And here's a cheeky thought to carry with you. Somewhere out there, in modern Greece, someone's probably still arguing about an olive tree. Maybe it grew halfway into a neighbor's wall. Maybe it's casting shade over a patio in just the wrong way. And someone, somewhere, is probably sighing and saying, "Well, Athena started it." You chuckle softly. Because of course she did. You return to the city now, slipping into the folds of Athens like a letter into an envelope, crinkled with use, still sacred. The streets are cooling under the early night air, and lanterns are beginning to glow behind painted shutters. But don't relax just yet, because it's time to talk about the Athenian courts, where things get, well, less olive oil and more olive spite. See, Athena's gift didn't just sprout trees, it also sowed bureaucracy, and nothing gets ancient Athenians more animated than a good legal dispute over sacred plants and inherited land. Let's rewind to the basics. Land ownership in ancient Greece was no small matter. Property passed primarily through the male line, with plots registered in family names for generations. But what happens when someone builds too close to a sacred grove? Or claims an olive tree planted 100 years ago actually belongs to their uncle's cousin's goat herder's niece? You guessed it, courtroom drama. Not just the modern kind with wigs and gavels, but open-air courts where citizens served as jurors and the audience might bring their own olives to snack on during the proceedings. You stroll past one of these ancient court sites now, mostly rubble and ghost chatter, but you can almost hear it. Voices rising, accusations flying, someone dramatically gesturing toward a twisted olive trunk as though it could testify. Historians still argue whether these property disputes were truly about land, or more often about prestige. Because owning trees linked to Athena herself wasn't just lucrative, it was symbolic. It meant you were touched by legacy, rooted in divine favor. So if a tree straddled a boundary, suddenly both neighbors became experts in ancient myth, tree ring patterns, and divine intent. And here's where it gets deliciously petty. In one recorded case, two families claimed the same tree as having sprouted from Athena's original olive. The deciding argument? One family said their ancestor had dreamt of Athena watering it herself. The other said theirs had dreamt of Poseidon being turned away. You'd think they were auditioning for a sleep-based legal drama. Let's zoom out for a second. The Areopagus, the Hill of Ares, served as one of the main courts of Athens, especially for serious cases like homicide or offenses against the gods. You climb it slowly now, the stone steps worn smooth, the view opening wide over the city's rooftops and olive-spotted hills. From up here, Athens looks almost reasonable. Down there, it's a tangle of ancient zoning laws and mythical zoning boards. Olive-related lawsuits weren't just for commoners, either. Elite families got involved. Magistrates had to weigh whether disturbing an olive tree for road construction was worth the risk of divine irritation or popular outrage. Some trees were so sacred that guards were stationed near them to prevent tampering. Touching one, blasphemy. Cutting it, a social death sentence. Here's your quirky tidbit of the night. Inspectors called epimeleti were appointed just to monitor sacred olive trees. That was their whole job. Walk around. Check for pruning violations. Report suspiciously non-reverent behavior. Basically, olive cops. Imagine spending your career patrolling plants and scolding people for improper hedge trimming. Athens had a whole department for that. Now, your feet lead you down from the Areopagus, through the bustling agora again. The market's closing, but you spot a potter arguing with a merchant about a cart that scraped his courtyard tree. The merchant waves his arms. It was barely a scratch. The potter replies, "You have wounded Athena's pride." They both point dramatically at the tree, which, frankly, looks fine. But to Athenians, that tree isn't just botany, it's the physical presence of a god's promise. If Athena's olive was a peace offering to the city, then any damage to her trees wasn't just vandalism. It was sacrilege. And sacrilege, well, that's when things escalated from civic grumbling to full-on religious panic. Historians still argue whether these trees genuinely held divine power or if their sacred status was a clever excuse to lock down high-value real estate. Either way, the emotional weight was real. People wept when sacred trees were damaged by storms. Citizens gathered in ceremony to bless newly planted ones. And festivals celebrated the first harvest of oil with as much pomp as modern opening nights. But back to the courts. You pass the site of the Heliaea, the large people's court, where juries of hundreds might be assembled. Picture it, the clamor of debate, scrolls unfurled with land records, witnesses called to testify on property lines drawn decades prior. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a single olive tree, stubbornly neutral, at the heart of a very human drama. And yet, amidst all the legal fireworks, a strange kind of reverence pulses underneath. Even those fighting over the trees never deny their importance. The tree is always sacred. The question is only, whose sacred is it? You stop near a fountain where a few remaining jurors are washing their hands, shaking off the day's disputes. One looks over at you, squints, and asks, "You ever hear the one about the tree that sued back?" The others chuckle. "Don't give the olives ideas," one mutters. "They'll unionize next." You smile as you walk away. In Athens, even the lawsuits carry mythic weight. And Athena's gift, meant to unify the city, somehow managed to seed one of its most enduring traditions, the gentle art of arguing about trees. The streets quiet around you now, softening into silence as you step past shuttered stalls and the last flickers of lamplight. But your path isn't quite done. There's one more place to visit tonight. One final corner of this myth that hasn't yet unraveled itself. It waits beneath layers of dust, stored in the scrolls of Athens' oldest scholars, the bureaucratic miracle of the Morii. Ah yes, the Morii, not a race of woodland elves or tragic poets, but rather the sacred olive trees that were legally owned by the state, all said to be descendants of Athena's original offering. And when the Athenian state says, sacred, it means paperwork. Lots of it. You find yourself now at the edge of a walled garden, behind the ruins of a once bustling administrative office. It's long since collapsed, but the air still smells faintly of olive leaves and ink. This was the domain of the Areopagites, senior magistrates who reviewed reports about tree health, boundary disputes, and unauthorized pruning. Riveting stuff, and oddly important. Each Moria tree was registered in public records. If a citizen had one on their land, they could harvest the fruit, but the tree itself remained under divine and civic protection. You could press oil, sure. You could trim branches. But remove the tree entirely? That was a capital crime. Yes, you heard that right. Chopping down one of Athena's trees could get you executed. Historians still argue whether anyone was actually put to death for olive-related offenses, or if it was more of a dramatic deterrent. But the fear was real enough. Athenian playwrights even joked about it, one describing a character too afraid to pick an olive without written permission from 10 gods and a notary. And here's your quirky tidbit. There are fragments of legal inscriptions listing the precise number of Morii in the city and their exact locations. Think of it like a divine botanical census. Tree number 54, southwest slope, slightly crooked but fruitful. Bureaucracy, yes, but with a sprinkle of sacred reverence. As you step into the shade of one of these gnarled old trees, still standing, somehow, after millennia, you hear the whisper of dry leaves. The trunk is twisted like a wrung cloth, the bark pale and split. But it's alive. Deeply. Stubbornly. As if it remembers the gods. Athenians believed the Morii were living relics, with sap that glowed faintly silver under the moon. That may be poetic exaggeration, but their importance can't be. These trees weren't just protected, they were watched. Citizens were encouraged to report tree damage like they would a burglary. Entire civil boards were formed around ensuring that nobody got too bold with their gardening. You walk now to the foot of the Acropolis again, gazing up at the Parthenon silhouetted in the starlight. And you think, this all started because one goddess planted one olive tree. And from that single act bloomed a whole civic religion, equal parts myth and municipal ordinance. Even beyond Athens, the idea caught fire. Other cities planted their own sacred groves, hoping to mirror Athena's favor. Colonies carried clippings from the original tree, like missionaries bringing relics of saints. There are stories, half believed, half invented, of sailors who refused to leave harbor without a leaf from the sacred olive pressed into their travel chests. Superstition? Maybe. But you know how that feels, holding on to a symbol when logic fails. Still, this divine land management system wasn't foolproof. Fires destroyed several of the sacred trees. Wars ripped through groves. Earthquakes toppled old root systems. And each time, the city mourned, not just the loss of greenery, but the wound it represented in their contract with the divine. And here's where it gets oddly tender. When one of the Morii died, it wasn't just discarded. There were funerary rites. The roots were preserved in shrines. The wood was carved into ritual objects. Even in death, these trees remained citizens of the city. So what about the first tree? Athena's original olive? That's where myth and memory blur. According to legend, her tree still stood beside the Erechtheian temple, growing from the very spot where she planted it after her contest with Poseidon. The Persians burned the Acropolis in 480 BCE, but the olive tree, it said, miraculously sprouted a fresh shoot the next day. A divine resilience. A green whisper from Athena herself. You climb the slope to the Erechtheion now, stepping gently, reverently, as though walking through someone else's dream. Columns twist upward like frozen wind. And there, to the side, stands the modern descendant of that original tree, planted anew where the ancient one once grew. It's not majestic. It's short, knotted, modest. But the weight it carries is anything but small. You stand in its shade for a moment, as Athenians did for thousands of years, and it feels like you're part of something larger. Something absurd, perhaps, but also beautiful. A tree given as a gift. A city that accepted it. And a network of laws, stories, arguments, rituals, and dreams that grew out of that moment. Athens didn't just honor that tree. It built systems around it. Protected it with the kind of care usually reserved for kings or temples. Because in the end, the olive tree wasn't just a symbol, it was a promise. Of peace. Of survival. Of something green in the midst of stone. And as the night deepens and the cicadas quiet, you find yourself tracing one finger along the bark, almost expecting to feel Athena's pulse beneath it. You ease away from the olive tree's shadow, letting its gnarled silhouette fade behind you as the Acropolis begins to slumber beneath its cloak of moonlight. But just when you think you've reached the calm center of this myth, you stumble into something messier. Bureaucracy, sure, that was orderly. But now we're entering the world of cults. Olive cults. Yes, really. Because what's a sacred tree without a little ceremonial flair? Down the slope from the Erechtheion, in a dim tangle of shrines and stone niches, the rituals unfold. Flickering torchlight. White-robed attendants with laurel wreaths. Women grinding olive leaves into powders, mixing pastes with honey, and pouring oil into shallow bowls shaped like tiny suns. These aren't public festivals. These are private, sacred observances, where Athena's olive offerings become medicinal, magical, even prophetic. See, in classical Athens, olive oil wasn't just cooking grease, it was currency, medicine, perfume base, and ritual cleanser. Every household had a small amphora tucked away for rites. Athletes rubbed it on before competition. Brides wore it on their wedding day. Newborns were anointed with it. The dead were swaddled in it. In other words, olive oil was the Greek version of Windex for my big fat Greek wedding. And nowhere did it feel more powerful than during these private rituals. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Every year, during the Panathenia festival, Athena's birthday bash, winners in the athletic contests were awarded amphorae filled with sacred olive oil. Not money. Not medals. Oil. It was that prized. That divine. But tonight's focus isn't on public glory, it's on the women in the shadows. The midwives and priestesses and caretakers of Athena's quieter miracles. You duck into one of the smaller temples, and the scent hits you, earthy, resinous, sharp. Crushed olive leaf and smoldering herbs. A young woman kneels near a basin, eyes closed, chanting softly. She's rubbing oil into a wooden idol, small, humble, barely more than a twig figure. And yet, in her touch, it becomes sacred. A vessel. This is where Athena shifts from civic icon to domestic guardian. In many Athenian homes, she wasn't just honored in temples. She was given a corner of the hearth, a shelf, even a niche in the wall. Small dedications, small acts. Olive branches tied with red string. Offerings of salt and oil. Tiny clay owls, wide-eyed and unblinking. Historians still argue whether these household rituals were state-approved extensions of civic worship or underground forms of folk religion passed down through generations of women. One thing's certain, they weren't optional. They were embedded. These were the rituals people turned to when the big festivals ended and the real world crept back in. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some women believed olive oil could ward off nightmares. They'd dab it on their temples before bed, whispering Athena's name for protection. Imagine that, a goddess of war doubling as a divine sleep aid. You linger by the doorway as the chant fades, watching her pour a few final drops into the bowl, then cover it with linen. She doesn't notice you. Or maybe she does, but chooses not to show it. In sacred spaces, presence is fluid. Back outside, the city lies hushed. Columns stretch like ribs into the sky, and even the stray cats seem reverent. You wander into a side alley, where another ritual is already underway, this one stranger still. A man crouches near a bronze brazier, tossing dried olive leaves into the flames. The smoke that rises is thin, white, fragrant. He breathes it in with slow, deliberate inhales, murmuring something under his breath. No idol this time. No audience. Just the ritual itself, small and strange. Athenians used smoke for purification, for banishing illness, for summoning clarity. And while this might sound a bit woo-woo today, there's something quietly reassuring about it. Like lighting a candle, or turning on white noise before bed. Ritual, in any era, gives shape to fear. Which brings you to an unexpected moment, a stone bench near an old public fountain, worn smooth by time. You sit, breathe, and realize that, despite all the grandeur of this myth, the gods, the gifts, the contests, it's these quiet corners that linger. Not the shouting in the agora. Not the flashing of Poseidon's trident. But the oil rubbed onto temples. The smoke from sacred leaves. The whispered prayers to a goddess who listens in the dark. Athena, after all, was more than a warrior. She was the goddess of wisdom, of crafts, of civilization's finer edges. And in homes across Athens, that meant weaving, healing, watching over children and lending courage to the sleepless. Her symbols, owl, olive, shield, each speak to a different kind of defense. Knowledge, peace, strength. But maybe the olive branch is the most powerful of them all. Not because it stops wars, but because it keeps people sane. Grounded, federal, clean, anchored. And that's the core of this whole myth, isn't it? Not that gods fought, but that one of them cared enough to plant something. To give the city a future instead of a show of force. And that future took root, in groves and gardens and even the tiniest clay bowl on a bedroom shelf. You lean back now, watching the stars shimmer above the Parthenon. Your breath slows. The night presses soft around you. And if you listen closely, you swear you can hear olive leaves rustling in the dark. The stars are a little brighter now, or maybe your eyes are just adjusting to the kind of darkness you only find in places steeped in myth. Either way, the silence around the Acropolis thickens. You rise slowly from the stone bench, legs sleepy, mind heavier than before. The air smells faintly of olive smoke and dust. And maybe just a little bureaucracy. Because here's the thing, Athena's olive tree may have been sacred, but that didn't mean it wasn't also prime real estate. Let's talk about land disputes. Yes, that age-old, sleep-inducing but somehow always relevant topic, especially in ancient Athens, where everything was sacred and everything was contested. You meander now through the narrow stone pathways leading downhill from the Acropolis, toward the older residential neighborhoods of ancient Athens. They're quiet, for the most part. Shadows cling to the corners. The sound of your footsteps bounces softly off the plastered walls. You pass a broken pillar that once marked the edge of a property line, and, surprise! That's where our next mythic mess begins. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The olive tree Athena gifted wasn't just symbolic, it became the anchor of a sacred grove known as the Moriae, or sacred olives, which were protected by law. Literally. These trees were declared state property. You couldn't chop one down, not even by accident, unless you wanted to deal with the Athenian version of City Hall, which, frankly, sounds about as fun as explaining printer errors to a Roman senator. Now, here's your fringe fact. Some of these sacred olives were so zealously guarded that they had state-appointed inspectors, public officials called epimeleti, whose job it was to go around and check on the trees. Like olive auditors. Can you imagine walking door to door to see if any neighborhood trees looked shifty? You pass one such spot now, a recessed square in the ground, surrounded by the crumbled base of what might have been a wall or a fence. This was once an old grove, or so the stones seemed to whisper. You can almost picture a man with a wax tablet and a measuring rod pacing solemnly between the trees, muttering about root damage and proper spacing. But this is where things got spicy. Landowners, wealthy Athenians with country estates, often didn't love being told that their trees, the ones growing on their private land, were technically owned by the goddess and, by extension, the city. Talk about awkward HOA meetings. Historians still argue whether these sacred groves were universally respected or if enforcement was patchy at best, depending on who you were and how much wine you'd gifted the local magistrate. Of course, that's the heart of the problem. When something is both sacred and economically valuable, lines blur. Olive trees take decades to mature. The oil they produce could fund temples, pay workers, and supply entire households. So when Athena gifted that first tree, she wasn't just creating a symbol. She was launching a property rights nightmare that would echo for centuries. And yet, somehow, the myth managed to hold everything together. Disputes were settled. Trees were guarded. Sacred laws were enforced, sometimes selectively, but still. You pass an inscription on a wall fragment now, half buried under dirt and vine. The ancient Greek words, barely legible, list fines for damaging a Moria tree. Steep ones. You crouch and trace the letters with your finger, the stone cool beneath your hand. There's something oddly comforting about a civilization so determined to protect its trees that it carved penalties in stone. Nearby, a marble basin once used for libations still catches rainwater. Someone's placed an offering there, a sprig of fresh olive, wrapped in red thread. No tourists. No signs. Just the quiet persistence of belief. That's what's so strange about this whole tale. It should feel dramatic. A contest between gods, a flash of lightning, a sacred gift. But the more you walk through the layers of it, the more grounded it becomes. Not in heaven but in policy. In property. In routine. And yet, it never quite loses its magic. You continue walking, ducking beneath a low archway where the plaster still holds traces of ancient frescoes, faded blues and ochres, swirls of vine and bird. A quiet doorway opens to what once might have been a courtyard. Here, the olive tree is gone, long since turned to dust, but the roots of the myth remain. In the floor plan. In the angles. In the way the house seems built around an absence, a hollow where something sacred once grew. You pause, imagining a family gathered here, children playing, elders murmuring stories about the tree's origin. Maybe a daughter pouring a bit of oil into a clay dish for protection. Maybe a mother whispering Athena's name during childbirth. Because here's your quirky tidbit. Some Athenians believed planting an olive tree near your home would ensure divine favor, especially if you did it on a specific moon phase while offering a lock of your hair. And if the tree thrived, proof the goddess was watching over you. If it died, well, let's just say you probably blamed the neighbors. You laugh softly under your breath, startling a sleeping cat on a windowsill. It blinks once, then curls back into its own mythic nap. In the end, the dispute between Poseidon and Athena may have been settled in myth, but the real disputes never stopped. They moved into courts and gardens, into the records of magistrates and the grooves of farming tools. The sacred olive trees were uprooted, replanted, measured, taxed, debated, protected, and sometimes quietly stolen in the night. And yet, somehow, Athena's gift endured. Not just as a symbol, but as a living thread woven into law, land, and ritual. A tree that meant home. A tree that meant peace. A tree that made the gods real, not because they were seen, but because their roots were underfoot. You press your palm to a nearby wall, rough with age. Somewhere behind it, a seed might still sleep in the soil. Waiting. Trusting. As if even now, the land remembers what was promised. Word count. 1093. The air begins to cool as you leave the ghostly outlines of old homes behind. The Acropolis shrinks behind you, its sharp silhouette softening into night. Your steps guide you toward the edge of the ancient agora, Athens' public heart. Here, the myths became laws, and laws became myths again, passed back and forth like coins, or gossip, or olive branches. And now, you start to wonder, how exactly did the olive tree grow into something so entangled with Athens' entire civic identity? Because it wasn't just sacred. It was everywhere. You find a bench near the ruins of what once was the Bouleuterion, the meeting place of the city council. You sit, listening to the soft hum of cicadas, the faint rustle of breeze through long-dead columns. And you imagine the city officials seated here, centuries ago, planning decrees with their styluses and wax tablets, occasionally pausing to dip their bread into olive oil, perhaps from a tree descended from Athena's original gift. Mainstream historical fact incoming. In classical Athens, olive oil was a cornerstone of the economy. It was used not just for cooking, but in lamplighting, religious offerings, perfumes, and even as an athletic rub-down before the games. Think of it as ancient Greece's version of coconut oil, multi-purpose, mildly sacred, and a little bit smug. And here's the weird, delightful twist. Victorious athletes in the Panathenaic Games, the festival in Athena's honor, weren't just awarded a wreath. They were given amphorae filled with sacred olive oil from the Morii groves. That's right. Winning a race could earn you jars of divine moisturizer. Talk about slippery incentives. A cicada buzzes right near your ear, startling you a little, and you swat lazily at the air. Somewhere nearby, a stone drainage channel still glistens faintly from an earlier drizzle. It's easy to picture this agora bustling with buyers and sellers, the scent of oil mingling with the brine of pickled lemons and the musk of goats. But beneath all that commerce, Athena's tree kept reappearing. Carved on coins, etched into pottery, woven into temple friezes. The olive wasn't just a crop, it was a political brand. The kind of propaganda you could drizzle over a salad. And that brings us to a delicious scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the economic dominance of olives shaped the myth of Athena's gift, or whether the myth came first and inspired the city's love affair with the tree. Was it divine blessing that made the olive sacred, or did the Athenians just have a really effective marketing department? You stroll now toward a low, broken wall where shards of terracotta litter the ground. One fragment shows a partial design, the profile of Athena, owl beside her, and, of course, an olive branch curling around the rim. These amphorae weren't just storage containers. They were trophies. Identity statements. Little portable billboards of civic pride. You imagine the craftsmen who made them, hunching over their work in smoky potteries. Maybe humming an old hymn to Athena. Maybe just muttering about deadlines. And in these moments, you realize something comforting. Myths, like olive trees, grow slowly. They need patience, repetition, care. And if tended properly, they produce fruit long after their original tenders are gone. You pass a small stone stele set slightly crooked in the earth. It's worn nearly smooth, but if you lean close, you can just make out part of an inscription. It reads something like, "For the good of the city, the sacred oil shall." The rest has been lost to time, but the intent lingers. The olive oil wasn't just useful, it was symbolic currency. You couldn't just grow it and sell it like any old crop. Sacred oil had sacred rules. The city's best land went to these groves. The best amphorae carried the oil. The best artists illustrated it. And if someone dared to steal from the supply or tamper with a tree, fines, shame, maybe even exile. And yes, you're thinking it, all this drama over olive oil. But maybe that's the point. When something touches every part of life, from bathing to religion to politics, it stops being just a product. It becomes a story, a ritual, a symbol people can cling to when the world gets a little too loud. Your feet carry you further now, to a patch of grass half swallowed by shadows. There's a single olive tree growing here. Modern, yes, but still. You reach out, run your fingers along its knotted bark. Rough, patient, familiar. A memory stirs, the story of Solon the lawgiver, Athens' early reformer, who, according to legend, tried to protect the sacred groves from misuse. He passed laws so specific, they bordered on neurotic, limits on pruning, on ownership, on how many trees could be planted per acre. One tree too many, and boom, legal drama. You chuckle softly. Some things never change. The leaves whisper overhead, and you tilt your head back to watch them flutter against the deepening dusk. There's something about an olive tree that invites stillness. A slowness. You sit again, back against a nearby column base, and feel the hum of the city begin to fade. Here's your quirky tidbit before we close this chapter. The ancient Greeks believed olive oil could not only preserve the body, but the spirit. Corpses were sometimes anointed in it before burial, as if the goddess herself might cradle the dead in fragrant arms. Now that's some deluxe afterlife packaging. You breathe in deep, tasting the air, feeling the grounded weight of earth, stone, and tree. In a city of gods, philosophers, soldiers, and poets, it's the olive that endures. Quietly, softly, with more persistence than lightning or waves. And you realize, maybe that's why Athena's gift won. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was enduring, simple, nourishing, something you could hold, eat, plant, bless. You close your eyes. The scent of oil lingers faintly on your fingertips. Still leaning against the worn marble base, you blink slowly as twilight folds over the ruins like a velvet cloak. The city dims, and so does your sense of urgency. Everything begins to slow. Your limbs feel heavier, the air warmer, the olive leaves overhead whispering you deeper into the myth. But of course, Athena's tree didn't simply remain a symbol. Like all things sacred, it eventually ran into bureaucracy. Welcome to the part of the story that involves paperwork. You rise from your makeshift seat and begin tracing your way down an old path, once the Panathenaic Way, where festival processions marched uphill toward the Parthenon. In its prime, this path glittered with banners, garlands, and maybe a few sweaty goats. Now, it's just dust and stone. But the echoes remain. It's here that you remember the bureaucratic brilliance of the ancient Athenian state. See, once Athena's olive tree was declared sacred, it wasn't just left alone. It had to be protected, counted, regulated. Enter the Morii, or sacred olives. These weren't just any trees, they were descendants of Athena's original gift. The city officially claimed ownership of them, no matter whose land they grew on. Farmers could work the land, harvest the fruit, and profit, but only under strict supervision. And here comes your mainstream historical fact. Athens had an actual olive tree inspector. A nomon, an official appointed to track, protect, and audit these sacred trees. Imagine being the city's designated foliage accountant. "Excuse me, sir, I'm here to check on your state-owned sapling." Ancient Greece, where even a tree could cause a lawsuit. So what happened if someone chopped one down? Well, that's where things get legal. The punishment could be severe: fines, confiscation of property, even banishment. Destroying a moria was not just agricultural vandalism, it was sacrilege. And here's where it gets deliciously messy. Historians still argue whether these laws were enforced out of true religious devotion, or whether the whole system was an excuse for the elite to control valuable land under the guise of piety. Sacred groves make excellent real estate, after all. You pause beside a crumbled column base where a tiny wildflower grows between cracks. Even here, nature persists. Quiet and unlicensed. And while we're on the subject of real estate, let's talk about land disputes. There's one particularly juicy story from the 4th century BCE involving a landowner who claimed a sacred olive tree on his property had died. He wanted the land freed up for his use. The city wasn't convinced. So, they held a public hearing to determine whether the tree was actually dead, or merely resting. That's right, ancient Athens once convened a tribunal to assess the vitality of a single olive tree. You half expect to find minutes from the meeting: tree appears dry, but root structure intact. Further observation needed. The real tension. If the tree was declared dead, the land could be returned to private use. If not, it stayed under state protection. And here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks believed olive trees could regenerate, even after being chopped or burned. Like mythological phoenixes with better skincare routines. So proving a tree was truly gone wasn't easy. They might wait years just to see if a new sprout appeared. Hope springs eternal, especially when there's zoning involved. The more you think about it, the more this all feels oddly modern. Sacred symbols getting tangled in legal loopholes. Religious reverence weaponized to guard economic interests. Trees turned into boundary markers. And all under the watchful gaze of a goddess who, let's be honest, probably rolled her eyes from Olympus more than once. You stop at a small fountain, long dry, where once pilgrims may have cooled their hands after ascending the hill. The basin is lined with moss now, and a few errant coins shimmer in the moonlight. Someone made wishes here, not to Zeus, perhaps, but to something quieter. A better harvest. An olive branch in the storm. You drop a coin in too. No wish attached. Just habit. From here, you look back toward the Acropolis, just the faint outline now, like a ship drifting into clouds. Somewhere up there is the Erechtheion, with its porch of caryatids and, just beside it, a gnarled olive tree. Some say it still marks the spot of Athena's original gift. Others claim it's been replaced so many times, it's more symbol than shrub. But does it matter? Symbols, after all, aren't about permanence. They're about memory, intention, echo. The story you keep telling, even when the roots have withered. And that's the quiet tension here, isn't it? The way something as simple as a tree can be both divine and disputed. A gift and a leash. A blessing and a boundary. Athena's olive made the land fruitful, but it also made it valuable. And once something becomes valuable, people start fighting over it. Even gods, apparently. You stretch your arms above your head, bones cracking softly. The stone path beneath your feet is cool now, the last of the heat having slipped into the soil. You trace your fingers along a nearby marble fragment, feeling the groove of ancient letters carved by hand. And in this moment, the past feels oddly familiar. Not just ruins and myths, but paperwork, property lines, stubborn neighbors, and arguments about what counts as alive. Olive trees. You thought they were simple. Now you know better. They're divine bureaucracy with leaves. The night has settled completely now, draping itself like a velvet curtain over the hills, columns, and lingering mysteries of Athens. You've made your way back toward the base of the Acropolis, not quite ready to climb again, but drawn to the place where myth and marble meet. You sit again, this time beneath another olive tree, one you suspect isn't sacred, though who's really keeping track anymore? Here, in the hush of the late hours, you start to piece it all together. This myth you've been carrying with you, from the drama of Poseidon's salt spring to Athena's olive tree, from legal disputes to sporting amphory, it's not just a bedtime tale. It's a blueprint, a map of how the ancients understood value, faith, and power. And beneath all that is something refreshingly mundane, a city learning how to take care of its resources without killing each other over them. Remember how we started? With a contest between gods, a horse, and a tree? And how, somehow, it led to zoning laws and agricultural audits. Welcome to Greek myth at its most delightfully tedious. Let's hit one more historical note before we drift too far into the dreamscape. During the height of Athenian democracy, some scholars believe there were over 20,000 sacred olive trees growing across Attica. They were so regulated that entire bureaucratic branches existed just to document their location, health, and ownership. Imagine being that guy who had to check 20,000 trees for unauthorized pruning. Somewhere in an ancient archive is probably a scroll that reads, Tree #14-203, subject of minor dispute. Suspected illegal branch removal. Investigation pending. Even the gods would have face-palmed. But it makes sense. When something feeds you, lights your home, heals your wounds, blesses your sacrifices, and pays your taxes, you protect it, even if that means dragging it into court. Still, historians love to debate whether the sacredness of these trees was a cause or consequence of their usefulness. Did Athena's myth elevate the olive? Or did Athens' dependence on olives require a divine backstory? You already know the answer: both. Myth and necessity don't compete. They just hold hands. And maybe that's the real magic of Athena's gift. Not the plant itself, but the power of a story to hold a society together. A way to remind people, this land matters. These roots matter. Don't mess it up. Your last quirky tidbit is this. Some ancient Athenians believed that if you dreamed of an olive tree, particularly one damaged or diseased, it meant there was discord in your household. Like a psychic arboreal thermometer. So if you woke up with a vision of a leafless branch, you might go check on your marriage or your pantry. Probably both. And now you sit under this very tree, not dreaming, but drifting. The marble is cool beneath you, your body heavy in the way it only gets when you're about to slip between waking and sleep. The Parthenon glows faintly in the distance. Somewhere nearby, an owl calls once. Athena's bird, watching. And you smile, because somehow, after all the city planning, courtroom drama, and horticultural micromanagement, the image that stays with you is simple. A young goddess planting her gift in the dust. Not for glory. Not for worship. But for shade. For food. For peace. And somehow it stuck. So now, here you are. Body still, mind quiet, breath soft and slow. The Acropolis fades, the tree becomes a silhouette, and the myths you've wandered through begin to blur at the edges. Let them blur. Let the images drift like smoke, Poseidon's wave crashing and vanishing into dust. Athena's calm eyes watching as her roots take hold. Amphorae clinking softly in the hands of dusty athletes. A bureaucrat scribbling about leaf density by candlelight. Let it all soften. You don't need to remember the details. Just carry the feeling. That slow unfolding of time. That gentle hush of night in a city older than memory. That quiet power of a story told again and again, until it becomes part of the soil. Breathe in. Let your chest rise like the marble steps of the Acropolis. Breathe out. Let it fall, slow and steady, like olive leaves tumbling to ancient ground. You're safe here. No gods arguing. No disputes to settle. Just calm roots, curling deep into the dark. Just quiet trees, swaying with stories. Let sleep come like the first drop of oil from a ripe, golden fruit, smooth, patient, and whole. Let dreams arrive gently, guided by owls and goddesses. You've earned them. End of script. Sweet dreams.